The fire was already dying down, but the smell of smoke still clung to the earth like a warning. The old wooden stake stood tall in the center of the town square, blackened and cracked, surrounded by scorched dirt. Around it, the people of the town stood in silence, faces full of anger, fear, satisfaction, and maybe even guilt. Somewhere, a child cried, but no one moved to comfort her. A whisper floated in the wind. Witch, burn the witch. The words didn't feel human anymore. They were like something passed down by ghosts, by generations who had forgotten mercy. No one dared speak out loud, but their eyes said everything. The woman who had stood at the stake just hours ago wasn't a person to them. She was a curse, a danger, a story they could blame for everything wrong in their lives. Ash drifted like gray snow as the sun set behind the hills. The sky turned the color of dry blood. And not far from the crowd, one man watched from the shadows. His coat was torn, dusty from the road. His hat pulled low over his face. No one knew his name yet, but his eyes were locked on the remains of the fire. He had seen many things in his life, battles, betrayals, death, but this felt different. This wasn't justice. This was something else, and he wasn't going to ride away from it. The town was called Gallow Tree. It sat alone in a wide, empty stretch of dry land between two mountain ridges, far from any railroad, and even farther from mercy. Most travelers never even knew it existed. Those who didn't stay long. There was something strange about Gallow Tree, something you could feel in your bones the moment your boots hit its dusty ground. The wind here didn't just howl, it whispered. People said the land was cursed. That long ago, a sickness came through the town and left behind only sorrow. Children stopped laughing. Crops withered no matter how much water was poured. Horses ran off in the night. The preacher said it was punishment for sin. The mayor blamed it on outsiders. And some folks, the ones who talked low after dark, whispered that it all started when she arrived. They never said her name, just her. The woman lived on the edge of town in a small wooden cabin surrounded by herbs and dried flowers. People claimed she talked to the trees, that animals followed her. A few women went to her for healing. A few men feared her because she never looked down when they looked at her. She didn't beg. She didn't lie. She didn't break. That was enough. Over time, the whispers grew. She cursed my crops. My baby got sick after I saw her. She looks at you like she knows what you're hiding. Fear turned into anger. Anger into blame. Blame into stories. And those stories spread like fire. By the time a cow died or a man fell off his horse, people didn't ask what really happened. They just pointed toward the hills and said, "It's her." And just like that, Gallow Tree had its witch. Truth didn't matter. Not anymore. The town needed someone to blame. And when people are scared enough, they'll believe anything, even if it means burning the only person who ever tried to help them. Her name was Eliza. Before they called her a witch, she was just a woman trying to survive. No one knew much about where she came from. Some said she was born in the hills. Others believed she ran from a place far worse than Gallow Tree. She never confirmed anything. She spoke little, moved quietly, and kept to herself. That alone made people uncomfortable. Eliza lived in a crooked little cabin made from old lumber and stones she'd gathered herself. She grew herbs in neat rows, hung wildflowers to dry along her porch, and kept a black dog with white eyes that never barked. People swore it wasn't natural, but to her, it was the only friend she had. She knew how to treat fevers, mend broken bones, and help women give birth safely. For years, folks came to her when the doctor was too drunk or too far away. She never asked for money. Sometimes they left her bread or honey in return. But once they got what they needed, they left quickly. No one stayed long around Eliza. She wasn't warm, but she wasn't cruel either. What no one saw was the sadness behind her silence. At night, Eliza would sit by her fire, holding a faded ribbon in her hands, whispering a name no one else knew. Some said she had lost a child. Some said a husband. Maybe both. Whatever the truth was, she kept it buried deep inside her heart, locked away like a secret too painful to share. Then the strange thing started. Lanterns flickered near her home. Horses refused to go near her path. A preacher's daughter went missing for 2 days and came back silent. She had a blue flower in her hair, one that only grew near Eliza's cabin. That was all it took. Rumors turned into fear. Fear turned into hate. Soon, they stopped knocking on her door for help. They started whispering in church pews and behind closed doors. The word which started slipping into the air like smoke. It didn't matter that she had healed their children. It didn't matter that she had never harmed a soul. They were afraid of what they didn't understand. And when people are afraid long enough, they turn cruel. Eliza knew it was coming. She could feel it in the way the wind no longer touched her cabin, in the silence of the birds, in the way her dog began to sleep facing the door every night. She knew, but still she stayed. He rode into town just after sundown, when the sky was bleeding orange and the wind had gone still. His horse was lean, tired from a long road. Dust covered his coat like a second skin, and his face was hidden beneath the brim of a wide hat. No one knew his name, and he didn't offer one. He didn't come looking for trouble, but trouble always had a way of finding men like him. Some said he used to wear a badge. Others whispered he was a bounty hunter who had killed more men than he could count. Whatever he'd been, it had left a mark. His eyes were sharp but tired, like he'd seen too much and felt too little. He carried guilt the way most men carried a gun, always loaded, always close. He went to the saloon, didn't speak unless spoken to. The bartender gave him a drink without asking questions. That's how things worked in Gallo Tree. Strangers weren't welcome, but they weren't pushed out either. The town just waited for them to leave on their own. But he didn't. That night, he heard the whispers, the fire, the woman, the stake. He didn't react, didn't ask, not until he saw her. Eliza was walking through town the next morning. Her hands were tied, her dress torn. Townsfolk watched her like she was poison. A few spit on the ground as she passed. But she held her head high, her face calm. There was something proud and broken about her at the same time. Their eyes met for a moment. She didn't flinch. He didn't look away. It was a strange kind of recognition, like two people who'd never met, but carried the same wounds. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story, but something about her reminded him of every mistake he'd ever made. Every time he'd stood by and done nothing. And this time, he wasn't going to do nothing. Not again. The days that followed felt heavy, like the sky was pressing down on the town. Everyone in Gallo Tree acted like something was coming, but no one said out loud. The air was full of quiet stares and unspoken threats, the kind of silence that came before a storm. The gunslinger stayed longer than anyone expected. He didn't say why, and no one dared ask. He watched the townsfolk, listened to their whispers. Every story about Eliza seemed more twisted than the last. One man said she'd cursed his crops. Another swore his wife had nightmares just from passing her cabin. The preacher spoke of fire and punishment, his voice growing louder with every sermon. But the gunslinger saw something different. He saw the way Eliza flinched when someone raised a hand too fast. He saw the bruises on her wrists from the rope. He watched her feed a stray cat outside her door, even when she hadn't eaten herself. She didn't speak much, but when she did, her words were soft, measured like someone who'd learned to be careful. One evening, he found her by the edge of the river, collecting herbs. "You know they're coming for you," he said quietly. She didn't look at him. "They've always been coming. You could run." "I did. Once." Didn't help. He didn't press her, just stood there with the sound of the water between them. "I don't believe in witches," he said finally. Eliza gave a sad smile. "That doesn't matter. They do." Word spread that the town was planning a trial. A public one. No laws. No judge. Just a mob pretending they stood for justice. The gunslinger tried to speak to the sheriff, but the man just looked away. "She ain't right," he muttered. "You'd best move on." The gunslinger didn't move on. The threats came next. Notes left under his door. A knife in his saddlebag. One man cornered him outside the saloon and growled, "She's got you fooled. That woman's cursed, and she'll take you down with her." The gunslinger stared him down until the man backed off. He wasn't afraid. Not of them. Not anymore. At night, he and Eliza spoke more. She told him about the dreams that wouldn't leave her alone. About the time she tried to save a boy who'd fallen ill, and how his mother later said she had poisoned him. About the loneliness, the silence, the way people looked at her like she was less than human. "I used to think if I just stayed quiet, they'd forget about me," she whispered once. They don't forget, he said. They wait. And so did he. But he wasn't waiting to watch her burn. He was waiting for the moment to fight. The day of the trial came with no warning. Just a ringing bell in the center of town and the distant thunder of boots on dirt. People gathered like it was a festival, faces hard, eyes hungry, a crowd looking not for justice, but for a show. Eliza was dragged into the square, hands tied in front of her. Her face was bruised, but her eyes were still clear. She didn't cry, didn't beg. She stood like a stone in the storm, silent while the town shouted around her. The preacher led the trial. He wore his black coat like armor and held a worn Bible in one hand. But there was no kindness in his voice, only fire and fury. She walks with the devil, he shouted. She poisons the soil. She speaks in tongues and conjures storms. The crowd roared in agreement. No evidence, no truth, just rage passed from one mouth to another, until it was the only sound that mattered. The gunslinger stood in the back, hat low, hand on the grip of his revolver. He had hoped, maybe foolishly, that someone would speak up, that someone would say this was wrong. But no one did. Fear had made them blind, and fear, mixed with hate, was a poison that couldn't be reasoned with. When they tied Eliza to the stake, he moved. Stop. One word. Quiet. But it cut through the crowd like a bullet. Heads turned. The preacher frowned. You have no place here, stranger. She's done nothing, the gunslinger said calmly. And you all know it. The sheriff stepped forward, but the gunslinger didn't flinch. You think this makes you holy? You think God's proud of this? Step aside, the sheriff warned, hand twitching toward his holster. I won't. The preacher raised his voice. She's a witch, and if you defend her, then you are too. Then I guess I'll burn with her. It happened fast. A gunshot cracked the air. The sheriff fell to his knees, blood blooming across his chest. The crowd screamed, scattering in panic. In the chaos, the gunslinger charged forward, bullets flying. He moved with deadly precision, taking out men who tried to draw on him, knocking down anyone who stood in his way. Flames had started at the base of the stake. Eliza coughed, smoke already filling her lungs. The gunslinger reached her just as the fire climbed her dress. He cut the ropes with shaking hands, pulling her free. Her body was limp, but she was alive. Hold on, he whispered, cradling her against his chest. I've got you. The fire spread quickly, catching on dry wood and old buildings. Gallo tree was burning, its hate finally swallowing itself. The preacher screamed something from the steps of the church, but his voice was drowned out by the crackling flames and the sound of horses fleeing. The gunslinger didn't look back. He carried Eliza through the smoke, past the townspeople who once called her a witch, past the broken courthouse, past the place where fear had lived too long. He didn't stop until they reached the trees. And there, in the quiet of the forest, he set her down gently. Her eyes fluttered open. You came, she whispered. I told you I would. She tried to smile. Even knowing what they'd do to you, I've done worse things for far less reason. They sat there, side by side, as the town behind them burned. Not in victory, not in peace, but in truth. And sometimes that was enough. The forest was quiet, far from the screams and smoke of Gallo tree. The night air was cool and still. Eliza leaned against a tree, her breathing shallow but steady. The gunslinger sat nearby, wiping blood from his arm where a bullet had grazed him. Neither of them spoke for a while. Eliza stared into the darkness. They'll come after us, she said softly. Let them, the gunslinger answered. We'll be gone by then. He didn't look back toward the town. There was nothing left for either of them. No justice, no apology, just ash and broken memories. Eliza turned her head slowly toward him. Why did you help me? He thought about it for a moment. Because I've watched too many good people suffer while cowards called it justice. I couldn't let them do that to you. She nodded, tears filling her eyes for the first time. Not from fear, but from the shock of being believed. They rested until dawn. When the first light crept through the trees, they packed what little they had. A blanket, a few herbs, a map. Then they began walking side by side into the hills, away from fire, away from hatred. They didn't know where they were going, only there would be somewhere new, somewhere no one knew Eliza's name. somewhere the gunslinger could finally stop running. As they disappeared into the distance, the forest slowly swallowed their footsteps. Behind them, the town they'd left behind would rebuild, but it would never be the same. Because once, in a place called Gallow Tree, a woman they called a witch was saved by a man no one trusted. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. Later, some would say the witch vanished into the mountains. Others claimed the gunslinger died, saving her. But no one knew the real truth, because no one cared to ask. In a quiet voice over the hills, her words remain. Witches aren't born. They're made by fear, by lies, by the need to blame someone. I was never a witch, but they needed me to be. And somewhere beyond the smoke, a new life began. One where she could be free. One where someone had chosen her. Not because he had to, but because he believed she was worth saving.